This video is going to be an introduction to drawing with basic shapes. First we'll learn about a few basic shapes, and then we'll discuss how the shapes you see don't always match the shapes that actually exist. Three good shapes to start with are squares, circles, and triangles. With these three shapes, you can make a lot of different shapes by either combining the shapes together or simply just modifying one of the shapes. So with a circle, let's chop it in half. We get a dome, a half circle. If we chop that in half again, we could get a pie piece. That's starting to kind of look like a triangle. If we combine the square and the circle together, maybe you could get a archway door. If you combine the triangle with the square, you would get maybe a house shape. If you combine a bunch of triangles together, you could get a star shape. If you combine two half circles with a triangle, you could get a heart shape. If you take the square and you stretch it, you could get a rectangle. Same thing with the circle. If you stretch the circle, you might get an oval. So the possibilities here are endless, and you can make many shapes out of this, and you can eventually make a whole drawing just out of basic shapes. And you've probably already made a drawing with basic shapes, kind of like drawing a house. So let's give that a try. So to draw a house, we usually start with a box for the main frame of the house. I'm going to start over. So when we draw a house, we usually start with a box shape for the main structure, then a triangle on top will give us a roof. Another sort of rectangular shape that angles out at the bottom could be a chimney. If we put a circle up here, that could be a window. A stretched out square or a rectangle could be a door, circle for the doorknob, another square for the window. And then if we add some half circles, these could be bushes. I'll go ahead and mark that in with the pen so it's easier to see. But if you look at a house, it doesn't usually look like this unless you're looking at the house from straight on. A lot of times our drawings will look too simple, kind of like this house, because our brain is telling us that the main structure of the house is a square, so I'm just going to draw a square straight on. And then our brain also says, oh, the roof, it's in a triangle, so I'm just going to draw a basic triangle. But if you want your drawings to look more real, you need to ignore what shape your brain is telling you that the house is and focus more on what it looks like from your perspective. So let's revisit those three basic shapes that we drew earlier, the square, circle, and triangle. So instead of a square, we're going to draw a cube. Instead of a circle, we'll draw a ball, and instead of a triangle, we'll draw a pyramid. So for the cube that's sitting on the table in front of us, it might look something like this. Then we'll have a ball, and then we'll have a pyramid, or in this case, a tetrahedron. These are our basic shapes translated into 3D objects sitting on a table in front of us. If we combine some elements of the ball or sphere and the cube, we could maybe get a cylinder, or like a cup shape, or a marshmallow. If we combined the circle, or the sphere, with a tetrahedron, instead of it being this angled base, we'd get more of a circle base, and that would give us a cone. And then if we combined the tetrahedron or pyramid with the cube, we would get kind of a house shape. So again, the combinations and variations are endless. These are just to kind of get you started. But if we look at these shapes, let's specifically look at the cube. There is no square in this drawing. Our brain tells us that this is a square object, but when we look at it, it's not really a square. So this is the difference between what the object actually is or represents versus what it looks like to our eyes. So if I get some tracing paper can show you what I mean. If I trace over the top of this cube, and we can focus just on that shape, that's not a square at all. That's more of a diamond shape. It's a squished square. So that's the difference between what our eyes see. Our eyes see this diamond shape, but our brain translates it into a square shape. And then if you look at the cube as a whole, it looks kind of more like a hexagon, a six-sided shape. So that's not a square at all, but our brain knows that that's a cube. So let's go back to the house, and instead of drawing the house with basic 2D shapes, let's draw it with 3D shapes, and draw it how maybe it would look like if we were standing there looking at it, rather than what our brain is telling us it should look like. Okay, so if we were standing next to the house, it might look something like this. I'm going to draw really lightly at first, just so I can kind of block in the main shapes before I outline it with the ink. And already you're starting to see, here's kind of that same cube shape, but again, it's not a square, it's this trapezoid type of shape. The bushes, I'm going to do some ovals. Our brain knows that those are circular, but since we're looking at it from a specific perspective, they look more like ovals. And then I'll draw the top of the bush. Another bush back here. Here's the rectangle for the door. In the previous drawing, this window was a square, but now it's kind of a squished trapezoid. Let's not forget the circular window, but since we're looking at it from a perspective, that's not a circle anymore, it's an oval. But our brain knows that since we're looking at it from a perspective down here in front of the house, our brain knows that that's actually a circular window, even though right now it looks like an oval. Even though we know that this is a square house, there aren't any squares in this drawing. If I take my tracing paper again, and you look at the front of the house, that's not a square at all. It's this weird, squished trapezoid shape. So in a similar way that we drew this house, a lot of times you can use basic shapes to kind of block in the main shape of a drawing before you go in and add detail. And we can use basic shapes to help us translate what we see in the photo or real life and onto paper as a drawing. Let's copy this painting of a bird. If I'm trying to understand the basic shapes of what I'm wanting to draw, sometimes I will blur my eyes a little, and this helps me ignore the details and just focus on identifying the basic shapes so that I can block in a rough sketch. I'll use this tracing paper to show you the basic shapes that I see in this bird. So, just looking at the basic shapes, I know that the bird isn't a bowl, but the shape that I see is kind of this half circle shape. Its head is kind of in a triangle shape. I've got a circle for his eye. His beak kind of makes a diamond. There's actually another triangle over here for his feathers. Then his wings kind of make these triangle shapes. And he's got his little feet. The post that he's standing on kind of makes a half circle. So then you can go back later and add in darker lines, more details, give him a little bit more curved organic shape. Okay, that's all for this lesson. In the next videos, we'll explore more of what we can do with squares, circles, and triangles. Here are some ideas for how you can practice what we learned. Pick a room in your house. Now look around the room and see how many basic shapes you can find without walking around. See what you can see in the furniture, in the windows. Now that you've found some shapes, draw a few of those shapes. Another thing that you can do is if you have tracing paper, then find a book or magazine with photos and then trace the basic shapes that you see in the photos, kind of like what we did with the bird drawing. And lastly, starting with just the basic shapes, whether it's the square, circle, and triangle, or the cube, sphere, and tetrahedron, see how many variations and combinations of those shapes you can come up with.